Hello, welcome. This is a video demonstration to accompany the chapter on teaching style in my saxophone pedagogy book. And we're going to talk about the things that differentiate various styles of music. I think those can be categorized into about 6 different areas. First of all, tone. There's different sounds that are acceptable between, say, jazz, classical, funk, rock, so on. Second would be the note shapes. Some note shapes are square, some are very short square, some need to be round. Depends on the style. Third would be vibrato differences. Vibrato is used in quite a variety of ways depending on what style we're playing. I'll illustrate some of those ways. Third would be the feel, the rhythmic basis, and the feel of what we're doing stylistically. Fifth would be articulation differences. There are many articulation differences between these various styles. And then last would be what are the embellishment differences. Each style has its own set of embellishments. So let's start in on tone. I just want to illustrate a few things. First of all, classical tone. In classical tone, we don't accept a lot of air on the sound. We don't accept any air on the sound. There should be no airiness. It should be solidly focused. We don't look for a subtone sound here, for example. If I go, certain amount of air on that sound. We can tolerate that or even welcome that in some jazz situations, but we don't really want that in a classical situation. It needs to be a solid, clear tone. Clearly focused the entire time. Where in a jazz style or a funk style, let me switch mouthpieces here. I would, let's say we're playing an old 30s style, we actually want a lot of subtone. It's almost a codified part of the style that you need that kind of subtone. We wouldn't want that kind of airy sound in a classical setting, for example. If I'm playing more of a straight ahead sound, you tend to about G or below, tends to go a little subtone, even in a mainstream type playing. In a more modern funk playing, I would not go to subtone down there. For example, it's fairly focused the whole time. It's going to be kind of more real sound down there, not subtone sound. So it really depends. I think of an image here. I've written this in the chapter, but the analog versus the digital sound. The old analog sound has a lot of noise in it, and the classical, or the digital sound is totally clear. When I was growing up on the telephone, it would be, I always tell the line is open. Now on a digital phone, it's like, you still there? So I think that our classical sound is more like that digital sound. We want to try to get rid of all the peripheral noise and make it as clear and clean as we can. Whereas in some of the other styles, we're okay with admitting some of that analog kind of noise. So I think that's an image that I've used successfully to help students with these concepts a little bit. Let's switch gears to note shapes. Now, if I'm doing a jazz thing, my note shapes. It's square. I don't want that roundness on the end. If it's funk, I might be super short, but still square. Or doing a kind of a Tower of Power lick. I'm going to use T there. I never use T in jazz. So there's a variety of lengths and so on in jazz and funk, but it's mostly the same shape, which is square. We don't need the round shape. However, in classical, we don't ever want that square shape. Put back my classical piece here. We want the notes to be round. It needs to have a roundness, a taper. But in classical, see, we're going to want to have a round shape on the notes. Even if it's quite short, it's going to taper. I don't want it to go squared off. It would not work in this style at all. Even on short notes, it still needs to round. Too square. No. Now if you notice, let me get a little more of a side profile here so you can see what I'm doing with my jaw. The jaw pulls back just a little bit. I think of it as up, but when it goes up, it has to kind of go back slightly too, up and back. And even on very short notes, I need that to be round. On longer notes, I may taper longer. I want it to go all the way out like that. A lot of times, so most of the time. So we're after a different kind of note shape here for the classical, where we want every note to be round. In the more modern styles, in a ballad, we might be more round. It's on my classical mouthpiece, but the ballad might use more round shapes, more symphonic kinds of shapes, whereas the up-tempo funk, rock, jazz things tend to be tongue-stopped with a square ending. We chop off the roundness of the end. So we do have to make notes shape differences, very important. Let's talk about vibrato for a minute. Different vibratos for different styles. So vibrato in a classical style tends to be more or less consistent on the longer notes at least, and on a lot of short notes as well. That's particularly true of the French approach. Let me play a French piece. So there the vibrato is used a lot. If I was, there are classical saxophonists that don't use that much vibrato. That's kind of the French approach, but it tends to be a little more narrow, not too slow, and fairly consistent throughout. As opposed to, in a more modern sense, a lot of the styles use a different amount of vibrato. If I use that 30s example again, there's still quite a lot of vibrato there, but it's quite a bit wider than it is in the classical. If I was doing more of a Glenn Miller thing, Now I'm using a little more continuous and faster, a little bit narrower vibrato. If I was doing a more straight ahead thing, mostly straight tone, and then on the last note of a phrase there might be a little touch of vibrato, but it usually doesn't come at the front of the note, it usually comes late in the note. Or classically, vibrato is usually at the front of the note, across the note. Once in a while you can do kind of a ramp up in a classical setting, but pretty much it starts at the front. In the jazz, more mainstream or straight ahead, we're tending to use the vibrato only on the last note, last part of the last note. Quite different. However, if you get into more of a fusion kind of sound, Dave Sanborn's kind of approach. Now there's vibrato not on every note, only on some notes, but when it comes in at the front of the note. So on. There's a lot more vibrato use here, and the vibrato is at the front of the note, fairly narrow. It's actually pretty classical, frankly. Just used not on all the notes and used in a completely different setting. So when we're learning styles, we do have to pay attention to how the vibrato is used. How wide is it? How fast is it? When does it get introduced in the note? Does it start at the front or later in the note? And how much is it used? Is it used on every note? Just a few notes? Those are the kind of things we have to be listening for to figure out the vibrato style issues. So let's deal now with feel. Various styles have different feels within them, of course, depending on if you're playing fast or slow or what the type of music is that you're doing. Let's take an obvious example from the swing, where we talk about getting that laid back feel. Well, what is it we're laying back? Well, we're not laying back the downbeat. That would be dragging. So we're laying the upbeat material deep in the beat to get that laid back feel. Now, I'm going to play a line, saxophone line from a Count Basie chart called Corner Pocket. And I usually hear it played something like this. And the person playing that supposes that he's swinging because he's not playing exactly straight. No, he's not. But the correct feel on that, or a better feel on that, would be a more laid back feel where I'm playing the upbeat material later in the beat, so that makes the downbeat material longer. Completely different feel. And so we have to be sure when we're working on styles that we're also getting the right rhythmic feel for what's happening. I think we have these issues in classical too. Let me switch back. Let's say you're playing the Bozza aria. I think this is usually played with a kind of a weird feel. This is a funny description, but when I think of something like the aria, I want the time feel to feel like I'm stretching the notes across the beats or across the bar lines. It's almost like stretching a drum head over a drum rims. It's like the notes stretch over that bar line and they stretch over the next set of bar lines and so on. It's not like each measure is a can and I'm stuffing the notes in the can. Instead, I'm stretching the notes across. It's a stretchy time feel. So I think you can kind of feel that I'm stretching those notes a little bit. Now, I'm not dragging. That could be done over a metronome, I believe. I'm not dragging, but I am stretching. And I think if I play it the other way, it's a different piece. It's a totally different feel. I feel like I'm just stuffing the notes into the bars. It almost feels like I'm rushing. It definitely doesn't have the right feel for the piece, in my mind anyway. So that's just a note that anytime we're trying to get the right style on something, we also have to pay attention to how does the time feel? How do the rhythms feel in the time? How do they feel in reference to the accompaniment? The next area of style is articulation. There is a lot on this, and I think that rather than spend a lot of time here on that, I would refer you to the chapter on teaching articulation, where I'm going to deal very extensively with classical articulation and jazz articulation, etc., even funk articulation and things like that. We'll be dealing with things like in other words, how do you handle mixed slurs and staccato notes? There are certain ways that has to be handled. How do you handle the articulation for the swing things that I was playing a minute ago? There are certain ways that has to be handled. There are certain articulation things that have to happen there. I think I'm going to let you listen to the other video for the other chapter to get a lot more detail on that, but suffice it to say that articulations are different between different styles, and it's critical that we do get the right articulations. As we're listening for these things then. We're listening for what is the tone that I'm trying to get? What are the note shapes like? How is vibrato used? How does time feel, and how do rhythms feel within the time? How is it articulated? Critical that articulation is right. And the last area that I want to cover is embellishments. Each style has its own embellishments. In classical style, for example, we have a very standard trill. We have turns, mordents, embellishments like those. In jazz, we have other kinds of embellishments, we could call them, or we don't tend to use the word ornaments so much in jazz, effects, but what about falls and doits and dips and glisses and plops and so on. So I'm going to deal with that in another chapter. I'm going to give you a lot of that in another chapter. I'll give you just a little bit of the classical here. Let's do how to handle turns, for example, in the Baroque era. Let's say we're playing something Baroque. In fact, let me use the examples that I put in the chapter. I should have you hear those. If I'm doing a Baroque trill, there are three parts of the trill. There's the preparation of the trill, or what we call the appoggiatura. There's the duration of the trill, which tends to be an acceleration, tends to start slow and speed up just a little bit. And then there's the termination of the trill, which are little termination notes. In the Baroque, there are two different kinds of terminations. One is what I call the anticipated termination, where you're anticipating the resolution note one note ahead. That would sound like this. Let's try that again. By the way, the trill should stop on the dot. This is on a dotted quarter eight, so it's a dotted rhythm. Any ornament in the Baroque area will stop on the dot. Now, if I did the other type of ending, which I call a turn ending, so now I have it's happening on the end of that. You don't really hear it that way. If I took the last part of the trill, that's my up, and then I go down, it's really like a turn. So I'll call that a turn type ending, as opposed to the anticipated. There's the anticipated note, of the resolution. The important points of that is I've got to play that downbeat. I've got to play that appoggiatura, or the preparation for the trill has got to be played on a downbeat. It's like 2, 3, and you can't go. It's not before. It's on the beat. And I tend to withhold the vibrato, for example, on the anticipated note, so I can flower out the resolution with the vibrato. That'd be one example. It's critical that we know how these things are supposed to work. And by the way, while I'm at it, I'll just, you know what? I'm going to give you a little bit more on this as I think about it. I'm going to take this over to the piano and illustrate why these things are, and then how they go through the style periods. Just a moment. So let's say that these are the last 2 notes of my cadence. And let's say the underlining harmony is this. So we put a trill on that second to last note. I think the reason for this is that it heightens the tension, so the release is more satisfying. We're in a style period where we don't have high tension chords. We're not hearing. We're hearing more this kind of level of complexity. So I think the Baroque ear loved to hear a little rub here and there. And so we can get more rub if I do this. Which is very cool. If I play it before the beat, I miss the rub. It's a non-harmonic note. An appoggiatura is a non-harmonic note in an accented position. And that's what we're doing. We're putting an appoggiatura here that rubs. And if we got a basso continuo bass line going on, it's going to rub with the bass line. So if I play it too quickly, okay, now I played it from above, but you can't tell. I don't even know, you can't hear it that fast. So I have to give it a little extra. And then the speed of the trill starts slow to match that, and then speeds up a little bit. And that would be my anticipated ending. Or this would be my turn type ending. Now, what happens stylistically, in the Baroque, we have both of those type of endings, and we always start from above. In the classical period, we don't have both endings anymore. We only use the turn type ending, and we only, we're obligated to use the upper note, the appoggiatura on the trill, at all the maiden cadences, but internal trills maybe not. For example, the Mozart Bassoon Concerto. I don't have to start all those trills from above. But when I get to a main cadence, I definitely will. I still will do a termination on those, and it'll be a turn type. Etc. So, in the Romantic period, now we never use a preparation for the trill. It always just starts on the note. We never start from above. But we still always do an ending on the trill, which is always the turn type ending. We never use the anticipated ending again after the Baroque. In the 20th century, we don't use the preparation, and we don't use the terminations. We just drop in, drop out. This is what a lot of us have grown up with in marching band or even concert band, symphonic band. We don't have to prepare the trill or put an ending on the trill, termination on the trill, so we're used to just dropping in, dropping out. That doesn't work in the early style periods. So the point I'm trying to make, just using this example, is that you must be able to perform the ornaments properly for a given style period, what you're supposed to be doing with it. Let me also illustrate Mortons. Let me do this with my horn. We'll move back over. Let me just add to your knowledge a little bit of Baroque ornamentation. Only in the Baroque do we use the true mordant. And the true mordant actually goes down. It's like doing a trill, but we only trill once, and it goes down. This is a squiggle with a line through it. You can see this in the book. I'm sure you've probably seen it before. This happens at the front of a note, and then the principal note still has time left over where it sustains. I don't go or anything like that. It goes right at the front. Sorry, the inverted mordant is what has survived to today, and this is what most of us have had experience with if we've done a mordant, which is up instead of down. Yeah, well, I put extra notes on that aren't in the example, but in the book. Anyway, we need to know how mordants are supposed to be done and what those symbols really mean. I hear sometimes the problem I hear with mordants a lot of times is so like this. Which sounds like a triplet now. No, the mordant should happen quickly. So there's some note left over after the fluctuation of pitch. You've got some note left over. Even when it's quite quick. It won't be a triplet. Also turns. Turn, of course, goes up, back, down, back. So this is a standard normal turn. Could be written with the shorthand symbol. But if a turn is on a dotted rhythm, I mentioned this a while ago, any ornament stops on the dot. So let's say I'm on a dotted quarter eighth. Ba da da. And I've got a turn written on that. Ba da 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 da. The turn will come back to pitch, back to the principal pitch. It'll come back to the principal pitch on the dot of the dotted rhythm, which will make the mordant, or which will make the turn sound like a triplet. So it's important to understand how these things work stylistically. Something I didn't put in the book, but if you're trilling on one note that resolves to the same note, no. I would use one note below in that case, but you always have a termination. Thinking of that Mozart bassoon concerto again. There's an example of that there where I hear people just do weird things coming out of the trill, but there should be a little gracefulness that comes from, now I just have one note below. All right, in jazz there are a ton of these. I'm going to put a whole separate chapter on that, I think. I will maybe mention that there are a couple of interesting conventions in rock and funk. For example, in jazz we always tend to bend or scoop from underneath if we're going to do that. In rock, it like where we'll put a grace note from above. And there's an ending right there, by the way, that's unique to funk. We would never do that in jazz. In jazz, so the vibrato on the second last note, the stress, diminuendo to the last note, kind of evaporates. That's something that happens in funk. So I think I've probably made the point that there are really important differences between these different styles in these 6 areas, and we need to be sure that we are covering those 6 areas. So if you're transcribing something, you're listening to all 6 of those areas to get all of it. When you're trying to learn any new style from a recording, you're observing in all those different styles. So I hope this is helpful on just an introduction on getting style. We'll be dealing with all these issues really a lot more in the coming chapters. But let me sign off for now, and I'll see you in the next one.